Hi, Dr. Kelly here, and I am going to talk about trauma in this video. So sometimes just talking about trauma, even though it's not going to be specific, it'll be high level, can cause some uneasy feelings. So take care of yourself in this. I am going to talk about trauma kind of in general, but as it relates to anxiety and depression, of course. And then also talk about how you might find a good trauma therapist, or how do you know if you're getting good trauma treatment. So stick around to the end if you want to hear that part. As always, thank you so much for being here. I'm glad that you're here. Welcome to my channel if you are new. And if you like this video, please hit like, subscribe, and then if you would, forward this or share this video with anyone that you think it might benefit. We're trying to spread the word, not just about the food mood connection, which is my favorite subject, but about mental health nutrition, about mental health in general, and some things that would be helpful for people who are trying to heal naturally from anxiety and depression. So thanks for being here. All right, let's talk about trauma. Take a deep breath. All right, so trauma can be kind of a hard subject for people. My view about trauma, and by the way, I used to teach trauma counseling when I was a professor in community clinical mental health counseling program for masters. We also had a doctoral program, but I taught the master's level trauma counseling class and really loved that course. And I also was a holistic psychotherapist before transitioning to nutritional therapy. So I am EMDR trained, brain-based hypnotherapy trained. I also did training in MBSR, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction. I did a bunch of other trainings, EFT, which is emotional freedom technique. So I like all of those techniques, and I will talk about those at the end of the video. Like, how would you use them? How do you know how to find somebody who can help you with those? But before we do that, let's talk about trauma. So I believe that we are wired for traumatic experiences. Like I don't believe that we were meant to not have any trauma in our lives. I mean, I just think about the way that we come into the world, being birthed feels like a pretty traumatic experience. But when you feel when your perception is that you have the support that you need when something traumatic happens, and that can be a big T trauma, some kind of trauma that we would all call a big T, like a car accident, sexual assault, any kind of assault, or an accident, or a big loss in your life. All of those we would call big T traumas, but also the little T traumas, the smaller things that happen over time. And a lot of those we think of as that's just life, that's just what happens. And that's true. And often, if you have the right kind of support, and it's perceived support, not that everyone else in the world thinks that you had the support, but that you actually felt like you had the support for that to become a growth experience. We often call that a trauma growth, TG, trauma growth experience. So it's not that we're meant to not have these things happen in our lives, but we are wired with this stress response through the sympathetic nervous system. Our nervous system, central nervous system, has both the sympathetic, the stress response, and the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest part of that system. And I think for a lot of us, particularly those that have developmental trauma, and I realized developed trauma did not make it into the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual for an actual diagnosis, but any of us who've worked in trauma and are trauma competent therapists know that developmental trauma is an actual thing. So a lot of, and it can be even little small T's, traumas that have happened throughout your childhood and in your life can just kind of compound. And we also talk about complex trauma. So when you've had multiple things and your nervous system is just kind of wired or, well, we're all wired for both. So I guess we would say you're just prone to that stress response. And that's just kind of always running in you. And that stress response is kind of like an engine in a car that doesn't get turned off would run it out, right? So you've got to find a way to relax the nervous system and have a balance so that when there is something really dangerous, it's fantastic that we are wired that way so that we will have the message to run, fight, flight, or flop and freeze are also options of the stress response. But the idea is that you would be able to survive. It's a survival mechanism. So fear in and of itself and anxiety is not necessarily bad if it is keeps you alive. It's when it's just running constantly. And those of us that are kind of hyper vigilant because of things that have happened in our lives, that can be take a toll on the system. So, a really great resource to just understand trauma. If you feel like, "Oh, I feel like there are a lot of like unresolved traumas in my life," then a great resource, The Body Keeps the Score, is kind of the best book I could ever recommend. It's by Bessel van der Kolk. This is kind of like the Bible of trauma and trauma recovery. So you can learn more about that if you don't have access to that book. There are lots of reviews and resources online that you can find for The Body Keeps the Score. But the idea is that our body, including our brain, gets in that position where it's almost like the trauma is still happening. So in trauma counseling, we talk about being able to move that experience to the done file in the brain so that the brain and the body are no longer feeling like that's happening all the time or prone to that kind of quick stress response. So that's when you haven't had the right kind of support after a traumatic experience, you can kind of get stuck energetically. From an energetic perspective, it feels kind of sticky, like these places in our lives that are just kind of stuck. And it also can be held in other places in the body, not just in the brain. So body work can be very helpful, like yoga, or different Tai Chi, massage, chiropractic, things that kind of move that energy, acupuncture, things like that, for that kind of stuckness. But also, if you know that you've had some traumatic experiences that relate to the anxiety, you have the tools are available. I guess you have the opportunity to clear that up. And when you clear that up, when you clear trauma out or you move it to the done file or however that makes sense to you, then it's not like you don't have the memories, because you still have the memories of what has happened to you, but it's not causing so much of the anxiety and the stress and those problems. So when you feel like there are certain things that you just haven't processed, and this doesn't have to be something that even everyone would be like, oh yeah, that was a big trauma. It can be some things that often when I've worked with people too, it's things that they're not even really realizing were traumatic events that are stuck for them. So it can take a little while to just kind of see what comes up as these places where you're stuck. But you can unstick them and you can move them to the done file. And if anybody tells you that that's a really long process, that is incorrect. That is not true. We can move trauma just like a surgeon can go in and remove something or take care of something in the body. It's very similar if you find the right trauma tool to go in and move it to the done file. It doesn't mean, just like if you had surgery, it doesn't mean that you don't have residual healing to do and some other work around that. And I think it's very helpful to have a therapist, counselor, companion, somebody to help you through that. So you're going to want to find a trauma competent counselor, because when it's related to anxiety and depression or any kind of mental health, when it's related to trauma, I don't care how much talk therapy you do, it's not going to get it's not going to clean this up. It's not going to go right to the root of the problem and take care of it. And you know, I'm all about the food mood connection. So, yes, I think good therapy is great. Doing some other kinds of healing things, great. The getting your food in a way that's very supportive and helps your nervous system and your gut, mhm, because there's that gut brain connection. All of that is important. And if it's trauma, then we got to clean that up. And I no longer do that, but you can find really good people in your area that are trauma trained. And this does not have to be long-term therapy. You can do some of these in a couple of sessions, sometimes even one session, and it can take care of things. So what are some of the tools? Like I mentioned, EMDR. So I loved EMDR. I love EMDR. I loved the training and I loved using it personally. It is no less than miraculous when it's the right tool. So it is eye movements, EMD, desensitization reprocessing. So it's using eye movements. So if we were in session, I would have my fingers like this and I would have you use your eyes, not your head, your eyes to go side to side, watching the finger. I don't think so. You can do that with light bars. Sometimes therapists will have a light bar that'll do that, but it moves your eyes back and forth. I'm not sure where my tappers are. You can do those with tappers in your hands if you're not really feeling the eye thing, or with bilateral stimulation with headphones in the ears. So it's going, that is also an option if for some reason. I personally think the eye movements are what are the most effective, but you can also use other like forms, tappers in your hand, like a in your hands. So EMDR is really a great tool. I have also been trained in brain-based hypnotherapy, very helpful, particularly helpful for people who like that visualization piece. That can be helpful. Mindfulness-based stress reduction. There are MBSR groups or trainings all over the country. You can look for one of those near you. Very helpful. I didn't find that quite as helpful with specific trauma events. Going in and reprocessing is more helpful to me. I also love brain spotting. So I haven't been trained in that, but I've done that as a client. And I really like the brain spotting. I personally love energy work. I think it's all energy work anyway, but going to a really good therapist that uses some kind of energy tool. And the reason I think I like that so much personally is because it's so efficient. And you don't even have to know what exactly was making you feel horrible for you to have some relief and get things cleared up. And when I first started teaching in counseling, I used to think you did need insight. I was very insight-based therapist and taught from that perspective of that clients needed to have some insight and then they could have you do not. I have found that to be absolutely inaccurate. You can, and it might be important to you to have some insight about why you are feeling the way you're feeling, but you don't have to heal. That's what's pretty magical. It's kind of like, when you hear this great song or piece of music or you start dancing and you don't even know what it is that's making you just feel better. That can happen. And that can happen with kind of any time, any tool. It can come out of nowhere. So you want to do some body work too, usually like some yoga or some kind of body therapy. Somatic therapies can be helpful. I'm trying to think of other. EFT, I think, is helpful. Emotional freedom technique. So that's where these acupressure points on the body, like here, here, here. You can find lots of EFT demonstrations all over YouTube or in places like that. But that's a tool you can use on your own. You can do EMDR, but I recommend that you have a good trained professional working with you so that you can just be there. They know how to handle things that come up, especially as you start reprocessing trauma. It's kind of like a truck going uphill. And you if it gets kind of intense, you want to keep going and go so that you can go over the hill and down, because then it gets better and your body feels a lot better. And a trained person is going to know how to help you with that. But it's not like I don't use these tools on my own. Of course, once you know about these tools, you can use them anytime. So how do you find somebody in your area? There are people that do this online. And so you may be able to find a practitioner online that will do it virtually. I personally really like in person. So to find somebody in your area, you start looking for therapists and you ask them. I mean, most people will have information on their website, but you can call them or email them and ask them, what is their trauma training? What trauma tools do they use? And there are other trauma. Rapid resolution therapy is very effective. Some other hypnotherapy. I just liked brain-based hypnotherapy. I thought it was very efficient. I like the efficient. So those are some things that you might check out, see. But I think that when it's trauma related, it makes sense to just clean that up. And it does not take a lot to clean that up. There are lots of resources too for, EMDR or trauma, if you want to learn more, that I will put in the description. So anything I can think of that might be helpful, I'll put some links in the description. But hopefully that is helpful and you will be able to get some relief from any of those unprocessed traumas that are just causing trouble for you. So be well.